Good evening, everyone. Tonight, we're honored to introduce our speaker, Doug Powers. He is an early Western disciple of Master Hua and has served in many capacities in the Dharma Realm Buddhist Association over the years, most recently as professor and vice president of finance and administration at the Dharma Realm Buddhist University. He teaches an assortment of classes ranging from Buddhist sutras to Western philosophical treatises. Doug has also taught at Berkeley High School for over 40 years. Versed in both Western philosophy and Buddhist thought, Doug is constantly pushing the edge of how Buddhism can be brought into contact with the modern mind. So with that, we would like to invite Doug to speak tonight on the legacy of Master Hua, Venerable Master Hua as a Chan master.
Well, it's an honor to be here tonight with all of you. I don't often get to speak at a DRBA. I'm usually speaking in a university function or in the general public, and you have to be a little more careful. But tonight we can speak pretty directly to Master Hua's legacy as a Chan master. And when people were talking about having me do this, they said, what you need to do is tell stories. Don't read so much Dharma as to tell stories. So I'll try to mix commentary of Shifu on the Master Hua on Chan practice and try to mix it with a few stories from back in the day. I guess that was, what, 50 years ago? I don't know how many years ago. I guess it was like almost 50 years ago. For this day and age, though, I hope everybody here does some meditation and has some sort of practice, because in the world that we live in today, we're pretty overwhelmed, as individuals in the world, trying to make it with ourselves, our families, the world we live in. The forces at work are so large, so big, so impersonal, so difficult to work with, that really the only chance you have as a person in the world today to both stay somewhat sane on one hand, have some sort of sanity on one hand, and on the other hand, have enough wisdom to actually make a difference, not just feel justified because you're on the right side of history, or feel justified because you're righteous about a particular ideology, but actually do something in your community and in the world that would actually make a difference. But that would require a certain amount of wisdom. And the best source, the best ground of wisdom is through Chan, through meditation and Chan practice. That's what we were taught from Master Hua back in the day, and continues on even today to be the major focus that brings together the mind and the conditional world, and working within the world in a useful, meaningful, purposeful, and useful way. So let me just let people kind of catch up with that, because I know there's some translation going on and I'm probably going a little quickly. So So what is Chan practice and what is Master Hua's legacy? Well, I think we're all very clear that Master Hua has a tremendous legacy with Chan. In fact, he was the Chan patriarch, the current Chan patriarch, following in the tradition of the sixth patriarch and many other great patriarchs of Chan. I'll read you, I'm reading you from some Chan lectures that he gave back in the 70s in the 60s and 70s. So these were very, very early Chan lectures that he gave during Chan sessions. So I guess everyone knows back, we started back real early when the Westerners didn't really know anything about Buddhism very much. Sir Master Hua set up a series of Guan Yin recitations, Amitabha recitations, and Chan sits to start introducing the Westerners to Chan. In fact, he had a 100-day Chan session. That was a little bit before I got to Go Mount Monastery in the mission. I got there in 73, and the 100-day Chan session was before that. Some of these lectures are from that 100-day Chan session. So the reason I want to both talk about Chan and also talk about Shifu's legacy of it is because I really, really feel that it's the most powerful tool that all of us have in our current existence to not just practice our Buddhism, but practice our humanism. Shifu said, I am not bringing Chinese Buddhism to the West. I'm not bringing Buddhism to the West. I'm bringing humans back to their nature. He saw what he was doing as bringing humans back to their universal foundation of their minds and their nature. And what he was bringing was universal in all minds. All sentient beings have the foundation of their consciousness and their awareness, have this Chan foundation. This foundation of, maybe put it, awareness of awareness. So rather than simply using the mind to be aware of the content of the mind as it's passing through, which is actually very useful to be aware of the content. Because if you can be aware of the content, you can see the karma of it. You can see how actions, certain thoughts you have lead to certain kind of actions, lead to certain sort of karmic outcomes. And so, of course, you can see all that if you can watch the mind and watch what's going on. But Chan is something deeper than that, than just simply watching the mind. It's using the mind to look at the awareness behind the awareness of the content. He often taught it through using the who, the Watto of who is mindful of the Buddha. So we would recite Amitabha for a week, for 7 days. We'd recite Amitabha, and then we would go in doing Chan, which was then asking the question, who is reciting Amitabha? Who is reciting the Buddha? Who has the mind totally focused on the Buddha? And then asking that question is an active question of the mind. It's not a dead, doing meditation is not a dead, sleepy kind of unawareness, kind of dead mind. It's a super aware, but it's very concentrated and focused, and it isn't so caught up with a lot of activity that's passing through it. So you could say, for those people who don't know about Chan, one way to put it in a Western frame of reference would be to say it's sort of focusing on being aware of awareness. We can find this in Western thought. We can find it in Husserl. We can find it in phenomenology and Husserl and various philosophical traditions in the Western society, even going all the way back to the Greeks. We're primarily interested in contemplation of the mind. So it's not, this contemplation of the mind is very universal, and it's not particularly just Buddhist. But in the tradition of Buddhism and in the tradition of Master Hua, it was perfected and brought to very, very, very refined concentration. I'll read you just a couple of words from his commentary on the Chan school. He says, the Chan school is the leader among the 5 great schools of Buddhism, in that it transmits the Buddha's mind seal, the seal of the Buddha's mind, pointing directly to the mind so that one sees the nature and becomes a Buddha. So the Chan practice is looking directly to the Bodhi, to the Buddha mind. When the patriarch Bodhidharma came from India, he widely propagated this method. At that time, the practitioners of Buddhism were still very enamored with literary prajna and exerted all kinds of efforts of composition and phrasing, lecturing sutras and so forth, praising themselves, arguing amongst themselves about Dharma. So we know there was, like in early Buddhism, lots of arguments about from different schools of Buddhism. He says, I'm skipping that a little bit. He says, everyone had different opinions. In the light of such circumstances, the first patriarch Bodhidharma made amendments for such biased teachings and patched up the flaws. His compassionate instructions were apart from speech. His teachings were not imparted through words. So he was imparting a direct mind. He taught that this mind of ours is just the Buddha, that the precious pearl hidden within our robe is not something gotten from outside. One only needs to concentrate one's energy and refine the mind to a single focus. And in an instant, one will open profuse enlightenment. At that time, the outer and inner aspects of all things, whether subtle or gross, are completely penetrated without remainder. And the great functioning of the entire substance of our minds is completely made clear. One opens vast and ultimate enlightenment and returns to the source, plumbs the origin. And at that time, one can appreciate the subtlety behind the interchange. The golden-hued aesthetic broke out into a smile. Originally, it was like this. So that's Master Hua's commentary on the early Chan, the arrival of Chan. And of course, being the Chan patriarch himself, there's a continuation of this mind seal in the tradition directly through the Dharma, directly through the Master Hua's Dharma. There's an actual mind seal passed on in the embodiment of the institutions, the left home people, the way places, and anyone engaged in the larger Dharma or the larger Buddha field of Master Hua, which if you want to find the foundations of that field, you can also find them in his vows. So many of you have read Master Hua's vows. You'll see they're very similar to the vows of Amitabha Buddha. That they're vows that are carried out over extensive periods of time through the sentient beings that are gathered in the midst of that Dharma. And so the tradition of this mind seal continues on even today, whether Master Hua is here or not here. It's continued on in the larger body of people, practicing in the name, practicing in the practices of, practicing in the disciplines of, practicing in the commentaries and so forth, Master Hua. Unfortunately, of course, the city of 10,000 Buddhas is not open right now because of COVID, and many of you would have a hard time getting there anyway from wherever you are. But actually, that's not a limitation. When it comes to Chan, there's no limitation of where you are. Wherever you are, if you're in doing Chan, if you're in the spirit of Chan, if you're practicing Chan in the spirit of Master Hua's Dharma, you're in that field, you're in that ground. So you don't have to worry, you're not there, you're not in a particular place. You're there when your mind is in the concentrated place of awareness that isn't so caught up with all of the activities and afflictions and so forth that is usually caught up with. And of course, it's not that easy. Doing Chan is really difficult. Any of you that have tried to do a Chan session or have done some Chan know it's really difficult. I remember my first Chan was in the summer of 1973, and Yeah, you have to, you kind of had to be there. It was a bunch of, we were about, I think it was about 8 or 9 people. The total session had maybe 8, 9, 10, 11 people in it. It was in an old warehouse in San Francisco on 15th Street. It was the original Gold Mountain Monastery back in the early 70s. And it had no heat. It was this really cold warehouse. So I got this call. I had been there during the summer at the Gold Mountain Monastery, and then I got this call. I left. I was a very, very happy, free-loving hippie in the 60s and living in Berkeley and San Francisco. And these original disciples of Master Hua came to him because he was the farthest out hippie you could find. Now, I know that's going to be a shock to all of you. Most of you come to Buddhism thinking that Master Hua was primarily the patriarch of the most fundamental traditional Buddhism, Chinese Buddhism. But you have to understand, for the early Westerners who had no contact with China, Chinese Buddhism, or any kind of context to even understand what that meant, okay, or what any of that meant, coming across Master Hua was this very interesting, very far out, older Chinese guy who was practicing these very, very esoteric and difficult practices, and sort of provided an opportunity for something that seemed even further out than the further out that we'd already tried to get to, which I won't go into the description of all that, in the 60s. So I had been there. He'd actually left during the summer. When I came, he had actually left for Brazil and left everybody in the monastery without any real anybody overseeing it. So I won't even describe the monastery when I was there in the summer of 73. But then I got a call. I left, and I got a call to come back from Master Hua saying, "Come back. We're going to do a Chan session, and I want you to come back. I heard you were here during the summer. I want you to come back." And I said, "Well, no. I'm out here. I think I'm going to the beach with my family or something. I don't really." He said, "No. You have to come back." So against my better judgment, I went back over to Gold Mountain Monastery and tried to do my first Chan, which, of course, sitting for whatever number of, waking up at 2:30 and then sitting from 3 o'clock in the morning, all morning, then all afternoon, then into the evening, was totally impossible. But we just kept plugging away. And every time I would get to running off, I would be sitting there, have my eyes mostly closed there. I'd be going, okay, that's it. I can't take it anymore. That's it. I would go to jump up, and then Master Hua would be standing right over me, and I'd run into his chest. He'd say, "Oh, you get to going." And he reached into his robes and gave me a little piece of candy. He says, here's a piece of candy. I keep going, no problem, keep going. So, and one night I tried to escape, and in the middle of the night, he was standing in the dark right in front of the doorway to leave. So when I tried to run off with all my stuff, he was standing right there, and I ran into him on the way out the door at like 1 o'clock in the morning. And again, he said, "Oh, you're getting to going again." So anyway, I won't go into the hilarity of my first attempt at a Chan session, but it was in the early days of doing Chan. Obviously, it's very, very difficult. Western had no idea what it entailed. Later on, when we moved up to the City of 10,000 Buddhas, we did Chan sessions in all the different buildings. Anyone that's been to the City of 10,000 Buddhas knows there's a lot of buildings. So one of the ways that we transform the energy of the buildings is to do a session in each building. So I remember doing 7-day, 2 to 14-day sessions in probably 7, 8, 9, 10 of those buildings as a way to transform the energy of those buildings. So anyway, we all know that doing Chan is difficult, and you really have to plug away at it and really work through the body and the mind to make any progress in it. The purpose of it, of course, is wisdom. Let me read a little bit of his lecture on Chan, on the purposes. And so he says, wisdom, the whole purpose of sitting in Chan is to open wisdom. From beginningless time until now, because we have not known to sit in Chan and have not known how to cultivate wisdom, we have grown more and more deluded. We have allowed our random thoughts to accumulate and proliferate. The purpose of investigating Chan is to become fully awakened. But awakening has no shape or color. It's not something that we can reckon or try to fathom with our ordinary human intellect. What is meant by awakening anyway? It means coming to understand how we are born and how we die. We need to understand where we came from at birth and where we're going to go at death. With that understanding, we smash through ignorance. And once we smash through ignorance, we will no longer have afflictions. And without afflictions, we won't generate errant thoughts. And once these errant thoughts die down, deviant thoughts will also lessen. With not so many deviant thoughts cluttering our minds, proper thoughts will appear. And with proper thoughts in mind, our wisdom will increase day to day. So a key aspect of Master Hua's Dharma was we did very intensive sessions, Chan sessions, recitation sessions, 4, 5, 6, 8, 10 times a year. But as soon as we were done with the session, we were immediately at work the next day. By the beginning of the next day, we were immediately at work in some big project that Master Hua was working on. We resettled thousands of refugees from Indochina in the 70s. That we had to have a contract from the State Department. We had to be involved in government, all kinds of government programs, government resources. So I thought we were going to the monastery to do Chan and do meditation, but what ended up happening was in Master Hua's Dharma is what you're doing in meditation is on your own time. That's your own ground, that's your own foundation. Then you take that out into activity, into the world in some kind of meaningful way. And you're supposed to do a really, really good job at that. And you're supposed to do a really good job at something that makes a real difference. That isn't just fooling around with stuff and feeling good about having the right thoughts about things, but actually do something. And in order to do something, it turns out to actually do something is a lot of work, requires a lot of technical knowledge, requires a lot of State Department contracts, EIRs, buildings, working out, transportation, working out details. And that is the wisdom. The wisdom is not having the right thoughts. Wisdom isn't having the right thoughts or being good. Wisdom is actually making a difference in the real world by understanding causality to the degree that you can actually transform the world around you, the family around you, the people around you, the community around you, the world around you, towards less suffering, towards more patience, towards more generosity, towards more gratitude, to try to create a certain amount of goodness in the world that can compete with all of the evil forces, all the negative forces, all the anxiety-producing forces, all the other elements that are loose in the world that have very strong and powerful forces behind them, as you all know. All of you would know from your experience. So to create a goodness in the world that counters that and actually transforms lives towards the good in a way that they actually suffer less, that they actually find meaningful lives, that they actually have less anxiety and so forth, requires you to be totally, completely engaged in every political, economic, social, every kind of dynamic in the conditional world that we currently operate in. The difference is you're not doing it for self. It's not for, you're not gaming the economic world just for your own self-interest and not just for your own comfort. But you're gaming the economic world, the political world, and all the other realms of human endeavors with a goal to transform it towards these good qualities, gaining some sort of foothold in the world. And the only way that can happen is with a profound sense of wisdom that does not have a lot of self-interest in it. And in order to be contented without self-interest, you have to meditate, you have to have enough Chan, foundation of Chan mind to be settled and still in yourself. You have to find enough stillness, enough contentment, enough clarity, enough openness, enough freedom in your own mind to be able to be comfortable with yourself and not be needy of all the attention that all of the different activities that you're doing is trying to get attention to make up for some sense of lacking or some sense of anxieties or something that you have from childhood to the present. You have to get past all that. The only way you can get past all that is with Chan meditation, looking into the mind to observe the awareness, the open, still awareness that lies behind the content. It's there with every moment of content, but the actual mind, that's the actual foundation of that content, is constantly being lost in the content. And unless you practice the mind with enough discipline and concentration, you can't find and you can't stay in that awareness and stillness and freedom long enough to both settle in your own mind and let that settlement eventually gather a position to observe what's going on with a certain amount of compassion and wisdom, loving kindness and equanimity, the qualities of the bodhisattva. Each one of you can be a bodhisattva to the degree that you can be a bodhisattva. It's not like all of a sudden you're a bodhisattva. When you're more generous, when you're more still and actually listening and actually according with conditions, you're acting as a bodhisattva. When you're getting angry, you're getting irritated, you're getting selfish and so forth, you're acting as a human being that's going to have various afflictions associated with those states. It's just the turn of the mind. It's just which mind is operating. And some days you might be a little more bodhisattva, and some days you might be a little bit more, sort of negatively human. But at the foundation of all this, the most direct, most profound ground of being able to be in a bodhisattva type mind is having a constant Chan, a constant practice that you are able to do every day. Every day, have a regular sitting that allows you to settle the day before the day starts and kind of review the day at the end of the day and see through and get back to the ground. And actually, I would say, even go so far as to say, actually exist for a few moments rather than just be taken up in the activity. So again, that's what we were for. So with Master Hua, as soon as you thought that you were getting a chance to settle into doing meditation, as soon as the session was over, you were sent out to run a refugee program or a hotel that somebody gave Master Hua a hotel in San Francisco. He says, go down there and run the hotel. Well, there's 92 rooms in a hotel down in San Francisco. The hookers are on the street in front. there are 80 customers every day in the hotel. There's massive amounts of complex activity going on, both with humans and with regulations and with business and so forth. And that was just considered part of your practice along with your chant. And how well you were doing, according to Master Hua, was not in the moments where your meditation was the clearest. How you knew how you were doing was when you were in the most difficult situation, how clear, how still, and how much wisdom could you bring to bear on working your way through problems as they arose in the actual reality of the conditional world. That's how you knew you were doing, how well you were doing. It was in this dynamic place between the mind and the activity of sentient beings in the world. So he says, wisdom is found in returning to the source and going back to its origin. That process is the opening up of our inherent wisdom. As this mind is open, we begin to truly understand. Ultimate true understanding defines a Buddha. A Buddha is simply that sentience that has this ultimate true understanding. A Buddha is really not different from an ordinary person. The only difference lies in the fact that a Buddha has open wisdom, has clarity and openness and can see, and isn't limited by perspective, ideology, a point of view, emotional reactions, and so forth. The only difference between you, each of us, and the Buddha and being a Buddha is just our opinion. It's just our emotions. It's just our thoughts. It's just our ideology. It's just being right and somebody else being wrong. Those who believe in the Buddha do not have to seek spiritual powers or wonderful functioning, such as the 3 bodies or the 4 wisdoms or the 5 eyes or the 6 spiritual penetrations. All we have to do is believe in the Buddha's wisdom. It is the wisdom that we have within ourselves. It's not an exclusive possession of the Buddha. It's a potential that everyone has. The Buddha simply pointed out that the road for us. And if we can follow that road, we too can open up to our original wisdom mind. Scientists, physicists, chemists, and many philosophers search outside for answers. In actuality, everything we need is contained within our own nature. In investigating Chan, we open up our own chemical laboratory and carry out all kinds of chemical experiments. Investigating Chan is a chemical process. In fact, it is the mother of science and the mother of philosophy. And it is able to help us develop great wisdom. Once we develop great wisdom, all our problems will solve themselves. People who investigate Chan can open up great, perfect, mirror-like wisdom. So investigating Chan, we open up great, perfect, mirror-like wisdom. Wisdom of equality. Wonderful contemplative wisdom. Wisdom that accomplishes that which needs to be done. Once we uncover these 4 kinds of wisdom, then the 5 eyes, the 6 spiritual penetrations will come quite spontaneously without seeking. So we're looking for the spontaneous mind, but the problem is you won't find the spontaneous mind because before you get to the spontaneous mind, you'll get caught up in the habitual mind, the mind that's so as you look for the freedom, everyone is looking for the freedom of the spontaneous mind. But on the way there, they get lost in the impulsive mind, in the habitual mind, in the emotions, in the afflictions, in the desires, in the fears, in the angers, in the justifications of activities, in the rationalizations. So as we're all looking for that spontaneous mind, but before we get there, it gets caught up in another layer of something. And Chan is looking through that, never settling anywhere in the mind for anything that's arising, not settling for anything, continually using the who or whatever method you're using to look down into the mind at a deeper and deeper and deeper level to find the source of your own spontaneous mind at a level much deeper, and know that it's going to take quite a while. You're going to have to really work over time because all these other layers are going to have to be worked through that arise up and take the place. So that's why you have to really stay at it, and you have to stay at it in the body. The body gets a little sore, the mind gets a little bored, the mind, you have to wait and patiently look through this and not allow a little bit of boredom, a little bit of pain, a little bit of whatever, then distract the mind off into a whole set of activities again. And do that at a regular amount of time. You're not just doing it like, oh, I think I'll do it a half an hour today. I'll do it 20 minutes tomorrow, I'll do it 45 minutes another day. It doesn't, Chan, you have to do a regular amount that the discipline of the time you stick to. And you're not doing it on the basis of what it feels like that day. If it's what you feel like, you're just falling back into the habits of what you're already comfortable with or not. That isn't doing Chan, okay? So once we uncover the 4 kinds of wisdom, and then the 5 eyes and so forth will come up spontaneous. However, we must have patience. So what's the key element to Chan? Is patience. We have to be very patient with our body, very patient with our mind, very patient with the people around us, very patient with the environment, the total environment. We have to be patient. And as we're patient, a certain amount of stillness will arise in that patience. At first, the patience takes a certain discipline of mind. But after you're patient for a while, a certain amount of stillness will arise. And if a little bit of stillness can arise, then you can observe, you can settle in and observe in that stillness. And then if you're looking far enough, keep continually looking into that, looking for the awareness behind even that stillness, looking down further and further and further into the mind ground, you'll begin to see things that really don't have words and things that you really can't exactly talk about. And you don't want to like settle anywhere and think you somewhere made some progress. Because as soon as you think you've done something, and of course, that self comes back into that, and then you lose even the sense of direction you have because you've already settled in some kind of limited sort of understanding that then you identify with in some kind of way. So must have patience day and night. We must focus on our work. In the morning, we should find time to sit. In the evening, we should sit again before we sleep. That way we can lessen our desires and purify our thoughts. In essence, we are carrying out all kinds of experiments of our chemical lab. What kinds of ingredients we put in it, we will obtain the corresponding result. Therefore, it is important that we maintain proper mindfulness. When we sit, we should be focused at every moment. That kind of concentration will hone in our wisdom in much the same way a stone is polished. One who is careless in the grinding, however, may grind the entire stone away to nothing. That refers to how if we keep doing our upside down things and abusing our precious energy and resources, our bodies will weaken from dissipation and eventually die out before we can make any progress. On the other hand, if we can cherish our primal energies and do not abuse our bodies, then we can remain in good health and our wisdom will increase daily. So of course, there's a direct relationship between meditation and health. If you can really work on your meditation, since it's very bodily, it's both mental, bodily, it's got many different elements to it, it's sort of also creating a certain amount of balance within the body in doing Chan. So it has a physical aspect as well. Okay, so take you through some maybe other, a couple other readings, and that might lead us to discussing some other elements of it. When investigating Chan, inside we regulate our minds, and outside we temper our body. Body and mind coordinate and functions as one, as the saying goes. Our words should match our actions, and our actions should match our words. Body and mind should blend together. Sitting in Chan, we must try to gather in the wild horse and the playful monkey that wreak havoc with our minds. Don't let them run outside and jump around. Instead, our every move should be in accord with proper decorum, and we should conduct ourselves in an upright and composed manner. When we walk, sit, stand, or lie down, everything should be done in the proper way. When we walk, we should move like a gentle breeze, not a hurricane that whips up trees and knocks down houses. The same principle applies to when we stand, sit, or recline. At all times, we should conduct ourselves as if we were still meditating. Be relaxed, calm, and centered. So the great thing about Chan is it's not just something that you do in meditation. That's where we have an opportunity to practice it in the most concentrated and focused way. So we need to meditate because that's when we really can put full attention on the mind and body. But to really do Chan in a way that will really be transformative, you need to be trying to do Chan all the time, or as much time as you have. And you have a lot of time between this and that. When you're concentrating on doing something, you should do it. You should concentrate and do it. But when you have time between things that you're needing to do, you should be doing Chan. And if you actually look into it, you'll see you have lots of time. You have lots of time when you're walking somewhere. You have lots of time when you're laying around. You have lots of time that you entertain yourself with all kinds of entertainments. And all that time could be used to be doing Chan. Could be used to be looking into the awareness of awareness. The who is aware. What is the fundamental foundation of awareness that's in this activity? Who is it that's doing this activity? Looking into the Chan aspect of what's going on. So the great thing about Chan is you practice it in a concentrated way when you're meditating, but then you take it into everything about the day. And again, going back to experiences with Master Hua, that's what he was constantly trying to get us to stay really focused and concentrated all the time on not only what we were doing, that we were really clear about what we were doing, but also that we weren't caught up in what we were doing in an attached way that was taking us out of our mind ground. To try to teach us to be in the mind ground at the same time as you're highly involved in an activity, and not lose the mind ground as at the same time as you're concentrated on some kind of activity. So when you were doing a project with him, and he was always having us do all kinds of projects, building. I remember the project that's now the back project that building project in the back that was going to build a Buddha hall and so forth that they're working on now at the city of 10,000, the Buddhas in the back there. When I was put on that project, I think it was 790,000 square feet, and the Buddha hall was 122 feet high. I don't know whether it was Sherpa's sense of humor. I can never figure out whether these projects were real or whether they were just meant either to be something to do, or there was this, I really can't grasp exactly what was going on. But the point of it every minute was, do you know what you're doing in terms of the detail and concentration of actually doing this project, which required taking it through an environmental impact report, through the board of supervisors, through the board, then through legal challenges, through engineers and people to build it, all the different elements of building a project, and that's how, which was actually more enclosed space than Mendocino County. I think it was probably more enclosed space than the entire of all the houses in Mendocino County. Maybe that's an exaggeration, but not much. And the constant interaction was around using every one of these kind of projects, whether it was a hotel, a refugee program, a huge building project, as a means to test out where you're really at. Are you really able to concentrate and focus on doing this thing in a way that would really get it done, in all the legal issues, all the other kind of complicated issues in it? And are you in any way identifying with it that this is your project, or there's something really cool about this project, or any kind of thing that you're getting caught up with it emotionally, or identifying with it? Or are you staying really clear while you're in the middle of doing these projects? And anytime that you got a little off on either side, you weren't doing the project really correctly on one hand, or you were getting involved and attached in some kind of way to it another way, then you got blasted by Sherpa to correct you. The blasting oftentimes, though, was moderately fierce, although he was incredibly caring, and you always felt that he had your back, and he would support you in any kind of any kind of real problem that you were facing, that he was there. On the surface of everyday life, he was very exacting, and he was very compassionate, but very seriousness of purpose. You had to have a really super seriousness of purpose, but he was also, there was also a kind of light ease and a certain kind of sense of perspective and a certain amount of compassion behind all the exchange, even if it was sometimes fairly fiercely instructive. I can think of many times that people got a very fierce sort of instruction. Of course, the other thing you never knew was who he was actually instructing. So if you're in a room of anywhere from 3 or 4 people to 100 people to 1,000 people, who he was actually speaking to and who the actual instruction was for was never quite clear. I mean, you could look into yourself and see if it had something to do with you, or it might be you were the person he was directing it for, and it was really about something else or somebody else. You never knew. One of the really important things about that I can say right now about Master Hua and many of the things that he said that people repeat or think they know about what he said, being in a room with him, hundreds of times when there was just 3 or 4 people, versus being in a Buddha hall when he was actually giving a Dharma lecture. And we actually have the records of those Dharma lectures and his commentary. If anybody wants to read, many of you have, his commentary on the Shurangama, Avatamsaka, and so forth. that formal conversation of his commentary was one thing, and that we have a record of. What he said to people on an individual level, though, in a more private way, was very much meant for specifically that set of people within those set of conditions. So generalizing from what he said to people in general, or taking what he said in those kind of conversations for his kind of ideology, his kind of principle about something, when it was actually about a particular set of conditions, he had to be really, really, really careful not to take what he was saying to people in the specifics of their conditions for something that might be generalized to everyone. So I think we've gotten away from people using that kind of knowledge of those personal things and saying, well, Sherpa said this and some kind of thing, and I'm going to use Sherpa to back me up on this, when it was in more of a kind of private setting. I think we've gotten away from that quite a bit. I think at the beginning, when Sherpa first passed, there was much more people using those kind of private conversations for a more generalized principle, when in fact, unless you had the wisdom to understand, it would be pretty hard to know whether that, how general that applied to people in general, if you get my meaning. So, okay. I'll read another, of course, there's a lot of, so what kind of response will you get? This is just following up on what I read. If you're able to get rid of your afflicted mind, your monkey mind, the mind that just can't get rid of all these thoughts and afflictions that are arising all the time, if you can actually settle in a bit of stillness and a bit of observation of your awareness and get kind of still and grounded, what's the response? You'll experience a state of light ease. You can't pinpoint this state. It's as if they're and as if not there. But in general, we feel a sense of lightness, ease, and joy. Now, many people misunderstand Buddhism. Buddhism is not a religion of suffering. Buddhism is a sense of directions from the Buddha on how to live in lightness, ease, and joy. And the suffering is just what gets in the way of that. So Buddhism is about how to find the mind, the mood. So we find ourselves in moods which are more foundational than emotions. Moods are sort of what you fall back into when you're not being entertained, when things aren't going quite right or whatever. You find yourself in a mood. It's sort of the background of who you really are in a really foundational sense. And as a Buddhist practitioner, you should be able to through your recitation, through your various practices, through your meditations and so forth, the point isn't to simply observe suffering, but it's to observe suffering to learn from it and not act in ways that continue that suffering to occur. So be patient with your mind when you're starting to get irritated. Don't let the irritation go. Calm yourself, be patient. Don't let the irritation gain momentum. As soon as you let the irritation gain momentum, then you get all righteous about your irritation. Then you give it license to get even more irritated. Then you give that license to get angry. Then the anger actually takes over your body. It takes over your mouth. It takes over then you get all resentful and righteous and right and all energy around your right. That whole progression from the little bit of irritation that first arises to a lifelong resentment about the way you is the suffering that the Buddha is talking about. It's a progression of the mind starting from a small thought of some kind and then just getting out of control and taking over the mind. So the Buddha is just pointing out where those kind of things occur. And if you can cut that off, for instance, if you can cut off the irritation before it gains momentum, and you can work and you can be patient with the mind at that moment and remain patient and let a little bit of stillness, then you'll have a sense of lightness, ease, and joy that will naturally arise from the natural mind. The human being's natural state is lightness, ease, and joy. That's the natural state of the mind. It takes a lot of work to be in anger all the time. It takes a lot of work to be irritated all the time. The Buddha's teaching that the fundamental mind is a mind of lightness, ease, and joy. But in order to experience the mind in that kind of way, you can't let the three poisons or whatever list we're looking at in the case of anger, you can't let the irritation arise and get out of control because it will take over the mind. And then the place where that would occur, that lightness, ease, and joy would occur. And Master Hua, if there's anything about when you were around him, he was completely at ease, completely comfortable, completely had an incredible sense of humor, was always extreme, had an incredible sense of humor that was always bubbling up. And he was in some sort of his fundamental basic state on a human level was just a very relaxed, at ease, joyous awareness that saw all this suffering going on and all these sentient beings that were in his vicinity and plus in all the vicinities of his awareness, which extended way off into space and time. And there was just this constant compassion and caring for all this suffering that was going on. But the whole point of looking at the suffering is to get rid of it, not to dwell on it. And if you notice, the current problem we have is people aren't willing to face their own suffering, the cause of their own suffering. They're always justifying, rationalizing, and making excuses and joining clubs and victimizations that don't allow you to get to the real source of your suffering, because it gives you some sort of identity that doesn't allow you to actually look into the source of the suffering that actually came from that irritation, that actually came from a little bit of greed that you had, that actually came from these fundamental movements of the mind that then you allowed the mind to continue down the road of. And the disadvantage, I know the disadvantage that people have now in not being around Master Hua in person is not having the manifestation of that kind of joyous, at ease, fundamental, actually being around a manifestation of that joyful, at ease kind of awareness that gave a kind of model for this Buddha way of being, which was something beyond suffering, embodied. So we feel a sense of lightness, ease, and joy. Our random thoughts will diminish naturally. We'll be like still waters on which no waves arrive. So if we can calm down the mind and still the mind, it can settle in a very super aware stillness that's very open, very fluid, just our natural minds, very still. It's not dead, it's not asleep. It's completely aware. And from that stillness, you can listen to what's going on. You can listen. You suspend that stillness, suspends the self, the ego, all the opinions. It stills all that. And then that allows other sentients, as they speak themselves, to be heard within the context of their own sentience, in the context of their own imaginations and fantasies and fears and so forth. And then we can engage other sentient beings in their own sense of themselves, not our projections of who they are to us. So the first stage of becoming a bodhisattva is very Chan grounded, because the compassion that we're going to develop as a bodhisattva has to start with stilling our own minds, having an awareness of the stillness of our own minds to the degree that we can actually listen to the people, the sentient beings in our environment that we have karmic conditions with, give them space to be who they are, engage them in their own experiences of themselves. And then because we have this added element of taking bodhisattva vows, we care. We don't just become Shravaka. We don't just go to nirvana. We don't just go to stillness. We don't just turn stillness into emptiness and hang out in Prajaka Buddha emptiness in the forest or in a really comfortable place away from everyone else, and just use our blessings to hang out in a very comfortable place from our karmic conditions. And the reason we don't do that is because in the Mahayana, we all took vows that we would actually care that other sentient beings were suffering and were going through lots of problems and issues. And however, the first time that we can really care in a way that makes any difference is when we have enough Chan, when our minds are still enough that we can actually open up the space for an actual awareness of what's actually going on. That's not just a projection of our own mind. And then in that awareness, if we bring care into that and we listen carefully and then develop the skills to intervene in a compassionate, loving, kind way within other sentients, we can actually begin to transform our immediate realm. And then as we learn to transform our immediate realm, we can expand the realm of our compassion to larger and larger realms. It really, though, to a large degree, starts in our Chan, because it starts in this stillness, this stillness, this light ease, but there's in general, we feel a sense of lightness, ease, and joy. And our random thoughts will diminish and will be like still waters on which no waves arise. Look at the ocean, waves surge one after another. The waves inside our minds are the same. Random thoughts arise one after another. However, if we develop samadhi, then inside we can gather in our mind, and outside we can regulate our body. When both our body and our minds have gotten on the right track, we will experience a sense of light ease. Everything's okay. We're totally aware. We're very still. We really care. All that can happen at the same time. This is a preliminary stage in the process of Chan. It is a foretaste of the first dhyana. This is just the basic human being. This is in Yogacara. This is the sixth consciousness at ease. This at ease is just simply calming down the sixth consciousness. And when it's calmed down and still, it can be super aware. And from that awareness, it can actually see what's going on. It can actually see when a thought arises and takes over the mind. It can see when irritation, or it can see what's going on. And it can go back to stillness rather than get caught up in the activity of the mind. So you have to develop, you first of all have to find the stillness, develop it, use it, and develop the muscle of it in the mind over time. All of that is simply the human, going back to the first thing I said, all that we're talking about so far is just a human being their basic nature. It's a preliminary to the first dhyana. We're not, at this point, we're not even in the first dhyana. We're just in the preliminary of the mind that all human beings have as the basis of their minds, or the basis of their mind of the ground, before we even talk about something like a dhyana stage. It is a foretaste of the first dhyana stage, the ground of happiness arising from concentration. It's a stage that many people go through as they start to apply effort in Chan. Therefore, don't take it as some very far out or extraordinary state. It's just your human nature being itself. Don't become attached to it. If you think that this is some kind of incredible state, then you're finished. You won't be able to make progress. You have drawn your own limits, and all your former efforts will be wasted. You won't come to any true accomplishment. So this goes on for quite a while, but I notice it's already like 8:38, right?
Yeah, maybe we can take some questions, Doug.
I kind of got started. That was the first 1 minute. I only got about 1/10 of the stuff, but that's okay. Maybe somebody has a question.
There's a question about how to do breathing in Chan. Is it, are there certain rules, or is it more natural?
Well, there's, when you say rules, there's no rules. Rules make it sound like there's somebody watching over you when you're doing Chan. You're only watching over yourself. There's nobody watching over you. So there's no rules. However, in teaching, I have used the 6 gates quite a bit. I don't know if many of you in Chinese will know the 6 gates from Chinese. It's a pretty famous text. And in that text, it goes through 6 stages of meditation, six practices that kind of interrelate together, and breathing are involved in the first 2. Any of you guys, if you want to look further into the 6 gates, we translated it, our monk translated the 6 gates into English. So you can find a copy that has the Chinese on one page and the English on the other page. In that text, I think he does a really good job of talking to what you're asking about. He suggests that you start with breathing, where you're counting your breath so that you have something to concentrate on, because when you first go to meditate, he says, it's pretty hard to stay concentrated. So if you're watching your breath and counting, the counting gives your mind something else to do along with the watching of the breath. When you get that down, then he suggests you go to no longer counting, but actually observing the breath coming in from the nostril all the way down to the solar plexus. Actually observe it coming through the body from touching the nose and the heat of the nose, inside the nose, all the way down through and then back out through the body, and observe the breath going in and out, and observe the mind observing the body and relaxing the body through every element of the body, taking it through the shoulders, the heart, down through the body, relaxing it. And then the mind observes the body relaxing, and as the body relaxes, it stills the mind. So the mind and body are brought together in that practice, the 2nd gate. And then when that gets still enough, then the mind becomes still. The mind and body become very, very still. Slowly but surely become more and more still. He suggests that it's that on the foundation of that stillness that you do Vipassana, that the observing of the contents of arisal and Vipassana actually comes from first having developed the stillness. And then when you've done that observation for a while, then you do Chan. Then Chan, he suggests that Chan is the Vipassana observer, observing the mind at the point of the arisal of content, turning back on itself and being aware of the awareness of that. So he takes the Chan move to be the awareness in the Vipassana observation, then the awareness, you turn the awareness back. And if you turn the awareness back on itself, then he says you'll eventually get into the sixth gate to a place where you'll experience the awareness being in empty space nowhere. And then you can settle in empty space nowhere. Now, you don't get stuck in any of these, you don't get stuck in any of these states. He's just given, and he says any one of them would get you all the way to different levels of dhyana meditation. But it's a nice, if you're interested in it, those people are interested in it. It's a very interesting text. It's pretty technical. But if people are really interested in meditation, you could take a look at that text. And the breathing part, it seems to me that for many, many, many people, they'd be really helped by observing their breath in one way or another and relaxing and grounding their body and mind in breathing and get settled in that first. He suggests doing that at the beginning of each sit for whatever length of time, and then moving on to further levels of concentration once you sort of got settled. And then some days you just might not be able to get to Chan. I mean, there's a lot of days. I mean, every day is different. I mean, sitting every day, I try to sit every day. I haven't sat every day for 50 years, but I've sat most every day for 50 years. And every day is different. I don't think I've ever had 2 days that were the same. And by the time, a day's up, you're already a different person. I'm like already completely different every day. I can't remember who I was yesterday. And I won't remember who I am tomorrow for sure. So, when you go to actually sitting, you need to have some tools in your toolbox. Some people like to recite Guanyin. I did the last 40 Guanyin sessions. I really love reciting Guanyin. I did the last 47-day Guanyin sessions. And although I really like Chan, I really like Guanyin sessions a lot. And reciting Guanyin is really reciting Amitabha or reciting the Great Compassion Mantra. These are also really super useful ways to meditate and concentrate. But I do see that Master Hua is a Chan patriarch. And all of these, if you look deeply into all the practices, Guanyin practice, Amitabha practice, all these practices, ultimately, they're fundamentally Chan. And the fundamental place you're ultimately working, even in reciting Amitabha, and I can show you lots of quotes from an Amitabha session or from a Chan session where he talks about Amitabha session, Guanyin session, Chan sessions, and the interrelationship between these different practices. We won't do that tonight, but
okay, Doug, there's one more question.
Okay.
It's about reciting Amitabha while sitting in meditation, and then he felt kind of pain in his back, but then he stuck it out, and suddenly all the pain disappeared, and only the sound of recitation was left in his ears. And then he felt his legs disappeared. So he's wondering what kind of state this is and how he should deal with it and how he should continue to practice.
Just keep practicing that. It's really good. So remember, a Chan session is from 3 in the morning, 3 a.m. till 12 midnight, an hour, then 10 or 15 minutes walking, then an hour sitting there. Okay, so where most of us are not, because of our days, we're not doing Chan. To do a Chan session, you have to have time and you have to have situation. But as soon as you do a couple of Chan sessions, you'll understand an hour of sitting, 2 hours of sitting, 10 hours of sitting, 12 hours of sitting, 2 weeks of sitting. You'll get challenged at various levels along the way. What you're describing is a really good sense of concentration. You really recited for a little while and you got a good sense of concentration. When you get a sense of concentration, your mind went off the legs, off the back, and you were really concentrated. So if you can develop that level of concentration, that's the beginning of really sitting. So it's really good. Just push it a little bit more, push it a little bit more. So whenever you find that you got a little bit of gaining something with it, then push it a little bit more and see where it goes. See if you can do a little bit more of that kind of concentration. And then take it to a little bit longer and see if you can take that into the rest of your day. Can you use that Amitabha not just for your painful back, but for your irritation, for your false thinking? Can you use it with all the family? Can you be patient with everyone in your family and have no reaction to anything they're saying other than joy and love and compassion? Oh, that would be some Amitabha there. And be at work and feel nothing but kindness and compassion and sympathetic joy. Oh, there's an Amitabha. There's some. So whatever we're doing in our sitting, that's great. But the question is, how much can we bring that into everything else until we have some kind of continuation of something over the day, over a week, over a month, that we find a mind that we can continue with over time and in different conditions. And we can stay in a bit of equanimity, a bit of stillness, a bit of awareness, continually through the different kind of processes that we're involved in, and create a kind of consistency of mind to the different aspects of our day and our experience and our relationships and so forth.
Okay, one more question, also from China. In meditating and doing Chan, it seems that he or she is distracted by sounds. Always the sounds outside, even the sound of the frogs. He keeps hearing all the sounds. How can he focus, or she?
Well, yeah, it's of course, Guan Yin's Chan was at the ear organ, right? So if anybody's read the Shurangama, you'll know that it's really interesting that Guan Yin's practice was the Chan of the ear organ, was where sound arises at the ear organ. So whatever senses, we have all these senses and they're operating, and then the ear sense we know is always open, whereas the eyes we can close. The reason that Guan Yin chose that practice, and the Buddha said that was a great practice, was because that organ is always open. And because that organ is always open, it's always taking in sense data. The ears are always taking in sense data. So that can be very, on one hand, you could either see it as a distraction. On the other hand, you could see it as a place to observe the mind. So you can turn that around and actually observe. So between the frogs quacking, and the garbage coming by and so forth, there's moments of stillness, and then there's moments of activity, of ear activity. So remember that ultimately Chan is having the same mind of the sound as the mind that's in stillness, as silence. The mind is not different. In the Shurangama, there's a really great practice, ringing the bell. For those people who read the Shurangama, there's an example that's given it where the bell's rung, and then what did you hear? And he said, I heard the sound of the bell. And then there's quiet. Then he hears quiet. Then he hits the bell. And then he says, what did you hear? I heard a bell. And then it gets quiet. And what's trying to be pointed out is the mind that we're looking for, the Chan mind that we're looking for, is the same mind, is exactly the same mind, the same awareness in the sound as it is in the silence. There's no difference in the Chan mind between the sound and the silence. It's exactly the same mind. And so actually having sounds can actually be interesting in cultivation because they can actually force you to stay even more concentrated to find the place where the mind stays the same or where the mind is the same when it's in sound or in silence. Just being in Chan and silence won't get you there. It gives you practice in listening to silence. But until you take that silence, and until you take that mind into activity, you're not doing Chan. You're doing an artificial state of silence. Now you have to do that. I'm not saying not to do that. I really, really love silence. I love to sit in silence, and I have very quiet places I sit, and I really like to listen to the silence with my hearing. I'm really a hedonist. Listening to the stillness with the ears is really a luxury, right? But I also know that whatever I achieve in listening to stillness and the concentration I get there doesn't really mean too much until I can bring that same mind to the rest of the activity I'm doing and all the other activities. So it's could be a disadvantage, but in the long term, you'll always have to come back to working on the mind that's both in stillness and in activity and finding the common mind in both, where the mind is common in both activity and stillness.
Okay, Doug, we have one more question about the interchangeable functioning of the 6 organs. Could you say anything?
Well, that's pretty far along. I mean, with the interchangeable, yeah, I mean, ultimately, we study Yogacara, we know that they're interchangeable because the senses are just, we could get into a big discussion about the 18, the actual sound, the content of sound, the organ, and the consciousness. And hopefully all of you have studied this a lot because this is really important to cultivation and practice, is to have a sense of these 18 realms. Now, ultimately, they're all one consciousness. So ultimately, it's all not divided into the 6th consciousness and the 7th consciousness and the 8th consciousness. Is not actually, ultimately, those first 6 consciousnesses are not ultimately separate. They're only karmically separate in the organs, first of all, the organs of the body, and then in where we put our attention and how we construct sense experience. But in order to bring them, to get to the level of cultivation where they become interchangeable in one, you'd have to have quite considerable amount of time to practice observing the 6 consciousnesses and seeing behind them the common element of consciousness that's fundamental to all the 6 consciousnesses that we still experience as ear consciousness, eye consciousness, and aura. But ultimately, they're just one consciousness. Okay. To experience that you would have to do a considerable amount of meditation.
We'll take one more question. This one's in English. You can see, in breathing meditation by counting, we listen to the number in our minds. So is that a kind of returning the hearing to hear our nature?
Yes and no. Yeah, I mean, everything is, as long as the mind is really concentrated and aware. So if the mind is single-mindedly on counting and observing that and single-mindedly concentrated on that, from just that concentration, that single-minded concentration, you could get enlightened, for sure. If you put your entire mind into just completely being attentive to that single-minded concentration of observing the counting and observing the mind, the awareness counting, and staying totally concentrated for a long, long period of time and not getting caught up in all the other stuff you usually do, it'd take you way down the road for sure. The 6 Ks, he says, any one of the 6 Ks can get you enlightened. So including counting the breath, he says that's counting the breath can get you enlightened.
Okay, well, that's great. Thank you so much.
Is that enough?
Yeah, you can take a breath and a drink of water.
Oh yeah, I better get it. Okay.
Yeah, we really appreciate it.
Thank you, everybody. Amitabha.
Amitabha. And Master Yong, do you need to announce something?
Yes, I want to announce next Sunday's event. Let me see. Let me share the screen. So next Sunday, we will start the 10,000 Buddha repentance. And we have Reverend Heisher to speak next Sunday evening. And he's going to talk about bowing and reflection, the internal and external aspects of repentance. Everything is the same as today's the link, and the YouTube link will be different. We'll provide that later. So it's pretty much it. So I want to dedicate merit. Doug, thanks a lot for your insightful talk. Appreciate that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And we'll also thank the Master Kanyin to moderate this talk and Adam Wang for the Chinese translation.
And the Vietnamese translation too.
Yes. Okay, Heinz, would you like to lead us to dedicate merit?
Okay. Everyone palms together, please. May the merit from this practice adorn all the Buddha's lands, repay the kindness from above, and rescue those in paths below. May all who see or hear of this resolve upon awakening, and when this body meets his end, be born together in the land of bliss. 3 bows. Bow in respect to the Venerable Master. Amitabha.
Amitabha to everyone.